Good morning, everyone. We have 35 people in the room, as well as my co-presenters, Nikki McIntyre in New York and Gordon Bozanak in Zagreb. Nikki and Gordon, can I ask you to turn your webcams on? Great. Thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Waving, we can't see the room, but you can see the three of us. So it's going to be a weird exercise for us for this hour to be speaking into the void, but a very well-meaning and curious void, because you are over 70 people to have registered for this webinar, which officially launches the guide Using Family as a Frame in Social Justice Activism, which addresses activists and funders who want to reclaim family values and the field and values around family in progressive work in Europe and elsewhere. The program today, as you probably expect, is a short introduction by myself about where the guide comes from and what is in it. And then I'll pass the floor on to first Gordon Bozanak from Zagreb, who is going to talk about what the guide can do for activists and how it can help them. And then to Nikki McIntyre in New York, who is going to talk about how the guide can help funders and grant makers. After that, that should be about 20 minutes, maybe maximum 25 minutes. And after that, there will be ample time for your questions and our answers. I'll activate the chat box, which you'll see in theory to the right of this video, and you'll be able to ask any question at all. By the end of the seminar, of the webinar, we'll also provide you with a link to order paper copies of the report for free. That's not open to the public, but only to people who are more closely interested in this work, which includes you, of course. Great. So thank you very much for being here today. I'll start with a very brief genesis of the guide. Why did it come to be? Essentially, in the years leading up to this project, there had been several referendums that have either extended rights to same-sex couples or have rescinded some rights or prevented same-sex couples from acquiring new rights. Examples are in Ireland and in USA, where these referendums were successful, but also Switzerland. And then in countries such as Croatia, Cyprus, France, Greece, Italy, Luxembourg, Portugal, Malta, and the United Kingdom, where these rights have variously progressed. In other countries, for example, Croatia, Slovakia, France, Italy, or Portugal, recently these rights have either stagnated, been prevented from growing, or they have decreased indeed. And so OSIFE, the Open Society Initiative for Europe, based in Barcelona in Spain, set out to learn the lessons from our progressive work around not only same-sex couples' rights, but also recent feminist issues such as accessing abortion or reproductive rights in, for example, Spain or Poland. And OSIFE, Open Society Foundations, decided to see what there was to learn across all these movements. What was there in common to these legislative or ballot victories? And so they started funding work for about 3 years. And for the first couple of years, it was more exploratory. And to conclude this period of 3 years, they decided to convene a group of experts of 10 movement leaders and funders who have been involved in these successes, to ask what is there to learn from our movements and what can we put in common for the rest of our movements to learn and to inspire themselves from. So this led us to working together for a year, collaboratively with Gordon, with Nikki, and with 8 other people to extract these lessons and put them into a guide, which you have probably already downloaded. So what's in this guide? In this guide, you will find mainly 3 sections. The first is why the guide is important, why it is important for us to reclaim family values. It's important for a very simple reason, which isn't spelled out in this way in the guide, but that is even simpler than what's in the guide. It's that we progressives have left the field of family and family values almost entirely to conservatives and neoconservatives over the last few years. As a result, when you talk about family values to anyone, they would usually think mother, father, child, marriage, because they have successfully, these neoconservatives and conservatives have successfully claimed that for themselves, and we've let them do it. So the guide starts by explaining to activists and funders who work for a better and more just world that it is important to reclaim family values and the family itself from our perspective. The second part of the guide explains what family equality is. Family equality is a concept that will allow people from various backgrounds, from various movements, LGBTI, women's rights, progressive faith, but also anti-poverty, also disability, also migrant and ethnic diversity, all these movements and perspectives to coalesce around hopefully what is a useful definition for everyone. And so that definition is very simply, it's not trying to define what family is, because this is a very tricky exercise, but it's simply stating that open societies should recognize and protect all forms of families where individuals experience love, care, support, home, protection, affection, support each other, are respected, and belong. And we believe this has the power to unite many different movements around family equality and to enable us progressives to talk about the family in a way that doesn't exclude anyone. And finally, what the guide also does is it offers 10 strategies on how to include family in our work. And that's including mainstreaming family equality into social justice activism, an overall guideline on how to do this, including family and social justice funding, and this is particularly for funders and grant makers, and Nikki will speak to that in particular later. It's how to include family in research and preparatory work when preparing campaigns. It's how to include family in strategic communication and messaging when talking about our issues, be they poverty reduction, ethnic diversity, or LGBTI rights. It's about including family in lobbying and advocacy and how to use this term in a way that doesn't antagonize anyone, including decision makers. Family in cross-movement alliances is about the importance of creating those alliances around family to emphasize the common experience of family. 7, family in media work is about integrating family, the concept of family and family values in our media work when we publicize our progressive issues. 8, family in litigation or strategic litigation is about the importance of litigating around family in diverse courts. Number 9, responding to opponents already starts acknowledging the reality of our work and delves into how do you respond to opponents of equality, those who are against either reproductive rights or progressive faith perspectives and the likes. And finally, it's about using family to work with faith and faith-based organizations. And I believe Gordon will have a very interesting example in that regard. So that's a very brief overview of what the guide is, why it came to be, and why it's potentially important for everyone in this room. And I'm now going to pass the floor to Gordon Bozanak, who is from the Center for Peace Studies in Zagreb, who is going to highlight 1 or 2 examples of how the guide and this approach can be helpful to activists. Before I pass the floor on to Gordon, I'm going to open the chat, and you'll be able to type in any question you like, and then I'll be looking at them while Gordon and Nikki speak, and we'll be taking your questions right after that. So Gordon, it's your turn.
Bruno, may I just intervene for a second? There are some chats where some people seem to be having some problems, and they're having to follow us on YouTube. So just bring that to your attention.
Sure, thank you. So if people are able to follow us on YouTube, that's great. Otherwise, what I recommend is that you keep the YouTube window open, and then you try to click again on the link that you received by email. And if that succeeds in loading, then you can close YouTube. Otherwise, you can stay on YouTube. Thanks. Gordon, up to you.
Okay, thank you, Bruno. Hi, everyone. I can't see you, but I will see you, I guess, in the chat room later through your questions. I will just shortly maybe say a few words how this guide can be used in our daily life and what was inspiring for me to be part of this process and what I have learned. Bruno already has mentioned that we know myself also as an LGBT activist in Croatia, how in the recent years we've been taking this defending position from neoconservative groups or ultra-conservative groups who start to attack the LGBT movement, but also the gender rights across Europe. And they have been monopolizing the term of family and calling us that actually the usual response from not all the groups, but what has been seen across the globe, I would say that we had this human rights response to that kind of attack, saying, yes, but there is a human rights law, there is international human rights law, we have a right to marry, we have the rights to exist. And so this rights approach, discourse and methodology was defending ourselves from the attacks of those who want to reduce our rights. And this has been successful to some extent, but also it hasn't been successful to get the majority of the people on our side. Because when the opposition was talking about the family, somehow the majority of the people who are maybe not taking the sides immediately, they will feel more connected to the idea of the family than maybe to the idea of the rights. And what this guide can help us maybe is sending to the public and ask ourselves, can we also start our campaigning, our advocacy work, our litigation work, our media work with the presumption that also we are families, that we live in different variety of families, and that even we don't want to claim the rights for our families because we are already here, and somehow to try to get the support of broader movable middle people to support our cause. In that sense, I think that this guide is really good to question the methods we are using, and what actually I'm using some of the communication messages, or we are planning some concrete advocacy action. It's always good to check to what extent, and if we do want, include the family, our families, as in the front line of the explanation, the needs and the rights we need. Because we are so used in this rights-based approach, which is of course important, and the idea is not to say that human rights-based approach is not important. It's just the question to what extent that should be the main message, the main front line of resistance towards the other groups. And also the second, maybe for me even more important lesson was how to include the non-usual suspects to work together with us on our cause. Because of course the different human rights are, so to say, natural partners, natural collaborators, and we are so close to them. But somehow the idea is also to try to attract the groups who are not the usual suspects. So the question is really, could the family or children organization be the one who can embrace the agenda and integrate in their work? For them, that will not for sure be the priority, and it can be very dangerous and harming for them, depending in which part maybe of the Europe and world they are working. But it's the way how to bring closer the different non-usual parts of life. One example which I am having from Croatia is a little bit totally different, and my organization primary is not the LGBT or gender organization. We are peace, human rights organization, although we have very clear positions on LGBT and gender rights. I would say very progressive positions. And one of the main core of our work nowadays is, of course, work with the refugees, where we have started to work together with some faith-based organizations. For us, that was totally new, because Croatia is a very conservative and Catholic country. It's totally divided. With the Christian Catholic NGOs are usually perceived as the right-wingers, as the one who are opposing to any kind of LGBT or gender rights. However, working on the refugee issues...
Sorry to interrupt. So for some people, it's breaking up a little. It may be to do with your Wi-Fi. Can I simply invite you to speak a little more slowly, and that should help solve the issue for most people.
I can slow down. So talking about the example of working with the progressive faith groups, or even with the faith groups, is our work on refugees, which is not connected directly to LGBT and gender rights. However, we found of my organization, which is very progressive on human rights, and some Catholic Christian organizations, which are not progressive at all on LGBT and gender rights, but are on the same track on the refugee position in Croatia with us. So we are helping together to the refugees. And in our common work through the last year and a half, we came to the point when we can also start to have common press statements, of course, not about the LGBT rights, but about the refugee rights. But what is even more important, this perception that two very far away on the positions on LGBT and gender rights can work together on refugee rights has brought us also closer to the idea that maybe one day we could have same position on LGBT and gender rights. And also it's very important to stress out when there is a queer LGBT refugee coming to Croatia, both us and them will help them with the same enthusiasm and power. So there will be no immediate discrimination of LGBT refugees in Croatia only because they are coming from some different background. So 2 years ago, I would never dream that we could even do anything with a Catholic or faith-based organization, but now we have really common agenda working together. And that's maybe one of the examples how we can, through our work, not necessarily through human rights, but through compassion, through care, include the others, non-usual suspects, and work together also on some other progressive agendas. That's for me now, up for me now.
Great. Thank you very much, Gordon. That was very useful. For most people, what Gordon was talking about when at the time when things were breaking up a little was how useful this approach had been for his organization, very progressive, to work with organizations with a religious background around the rights of migrants and refugees in Croatia. Thank you very much, Gordon. And I'm now going to turn to Nikki McIntyre in New York. Nikki is going to turn on her webcam and microphone, and she is the Chief Executive Officer at the Foundation for a Just Society in New York. And she's going to talk about how the guide can help funders and grant makers make a difference in the field of family.
Hi, everybody. Just to clarify, I've just started at the Foundation for a Just Society. So I've been here for about 5 days now. And prior to that, I was with Mama Cash in Amsterdam, funding women, girls, and trans organizations around the world. I want to just share a little bit with you from the perspective of a funder, as to why and how possibly this guide can be helpful to you as funders. I'm a little unclear how many funders might be on the call at this point. But in some ways, I'm going to stress again some of the things that Gordon just reflected on, but from the perspective of a funder. I think this guide helps funders do something that we often talk about doing, which is being more holistic in our approach to and being more focused on building alliances and supporting cross-movement work between movements. I think helping progressive movements increasingly come together at a time where they are increasingly under attack in Europe, but also around the world. I think we are all possibly familiar with the term closing space. Some of us are quite sick and tired of the term even, but the closing space for civil society is an increasing reality for many organizations, although I have to say that for many feminist organizations, LGBTQI organizations, and as well as others, this has been a reality for at least a decade and maybe even as many as 3 decades, the kinds of challenges that they are now facing. But this closing space phenomenon especially targets feminists especially targets women's rights activists, especially targets LGBTQ people, gender non-conforming people, and the list can go on. But because it's often accompanied by very nationalistic and xenophobic elements, it's also affecting migrants, it's affecting people of color, and broader communities that are increasingly vulnerable. And so this family equality approach and this family equality framework, in my opinion, as a funder, can help funders fulfill that dream. And I think the demand increasingly from the kinds of organizations that we are supporting to support movement building, to support alliance building, and to bring kind of, as Gordon was saying, unusual allies together to first and foremost talk, to think, to articulate shared agendas, shared visions, shared strategies, and possible ways to act, which as a funder and as a movement building funder, I feel convinced is a big part of future solutions on the table. And so, for example, what we see is that in bringing and supporting groups that want to come together, movements and groups that want to come together, for example, organizations working on children's rights, organizations working on anti-poverty, for LGBTQI equality, they could have a way to explain around to use the concept of family equality. So the protection from the state, social recognition for their families, and access to resources. They could use that to build greater respect for children's rights, reduce risks of poverty and exclusion, and have greater success in that process. So that big piece for me is about building these, giving support to groups that maybe want to be able to come together, but haven't had the time and the space to be able to figure out what the shared agenda is. And through a family equality lens, that is one possible way of doing it. It also, from a funder perspective, I think it helps experiment more with another point that Gordon was just making, which is really supporting groups to try, in some ways, new ways of articulating their work. It's not about moving away from a rights-based framework. It's not about entirely dropping the rights language. I would never advocate for that. But it is also about using language in ways and concepts in ways that allow more people to come on board, to join in with us, and to do so in such a way that we're talking less about individual people's rights and the relationship between individuals and the state, and more broadly talking about social justice issues, more broadly talking about issues such as racism, sexism, poverty, exclusion, those kinds of things, and using family equality as a way to be talking about those. So I think it enables us as funders to support efforts that go beyond traditional approaches based on rights, and take more of a values-based approach, where we're talking about that we all belong to families of very different sorts, and they all need to be recognized. And by doing so, we can possibly bring more people along with us who can get behind our messages. And as we saw in Ireland, for example, and where funders there were like Atlantic Philanthropies, played a big role in providing, core flexible support to support the myriad of strategies that Bruno laid out at the beginning that are necessary to push forward a kind of family equality message, which also pushes forward a broader message of social justice. I'll stop there and pass back to you, Bruno.
Great. Thank you so much, Nikki. That was very useful and very interesting. Thank you, everyone in the room, for a couple of questions already. There is a remark from Willy Elhurst from the European Forum of LGBT Christian Groups that indeed faith-based human rights organizations can also be LGBTI, and they can also be faith-based. So they play on both issues and in both fields. And of course, this is something we acknowledge fully in the guide. And this is precisely why we say we should be using concepts such as the family, because that concerns everyone, regardless of sexual orientation or faith or ethnic background or socioeconomic background or gender, etc. We've had a first question from Michael Brinkschroeder from Germany, and I'm going to remind everyone that if you want to ask a question, you can go to the chat room to the right of this window and type in your question, and we'll be answering them right now. So I'm first going to turn to Gordon, and Gordon, there is Michael who asks, why did we avoid a legally useful definition of family in the guide? Is it really impossible to find such a definition? Do you want to tell us what we did?
I should recall my memories, but I know that we spent quite a few hours and maybe days of thinking on this miracle legal definition of family, and we have consulted also the lawyers, and I think that the goal was really not to help the lawyers to get more cases, to win more the cases before the courts with a good new definition of the family, because it can be an endless discussion. I think that definition of the family, not the so-called legal definition, but the concept of family, which we have offered through the guide, reflects also the main goal, the main idea of our guide, to try somehow to move away from necessarily legal framework, rights-based approach framework in arguing for the family, but try to experience the family in more emotional categories. So this is why we are talking in the guide about the belonging, love. Those categories we've been promoting and putting in the first on the agenda, believing that change in the discourse, in the messaging, can also be very effective in confronting the ones who are actually have monopolized the So we never perceive that our task is to get a legal definition, but rather to put it in more this fluid way, which can be used for activism.
Great, thank you very much. And to add to what you were just saying, there's Neha who is concurring with you about including non-usual suspects. And to add what you were saying, the importance of not defining lies in realizing that whatever definition we were coming up with was excluding someone. And so that basically made us realize that we had to orient ourselves not towards the definition, but towards the description of a norm, an ideal society in which all forms of families would be recognized and protected. Nikki, you wanted to come in.
Yeah, I just want to add that this also came very much from the convening that we hosted. There were strong feelings that we shouldn't rely on a legal definition for the very reason that you just said, Bruno. So this was really kind of listening to what many others felt and came out of that process. So this isn't just what the 8 or 10 people who participated in this process thought. This really came after significant consultation with many. It's a reflection of that.
Absolutely, thank you. There's Ali as well who contributes in this direction, and who says it's not about definitions, it's about looking at what functions as a family. I want to stress that we're over 40 in the room, and in the room, to answer your question, Nikki, earlier, are funders, global women's rights organizations, reproductive rights organizations, religious organizations, children's rights organizations, people working on youth rights as well, people working in international development. There are UN agencies, LGBTI organizations, and people working variously at the national, regional, and global level, and people doing campaigning, legal, advocacy work. So it's an exceptionally diverse room. And I'm going to turn to you one other time to invite you for questions. I see more questions here. The next one is from Adrian. Adrian states, the conservative opposition tends to use very emotional public messages, while we human rights defenders in the human rights movement tend to use very rational public messages. If you agree, are these approaches inherent to family values versus human rights frames, and can we adapt our approach? Nikki or Gordon, do you want to take this? Emotional versus rational messaging. Okay, Gordon, go ahead. Just to remind you, you need to slow down because your Wi-Fi sometimes breaks out. Go ahead.
Okay, so I fully agree with the observation from Adrian. Yeah, the rational arguments are usually connected with this strict human rights argumentation, not understood by the majority of the people. Maybe it's understood by some of the political elites, maybe it's understood by our communities, but the question is how the broader public can resonate with messages. And of course, when we are talking about emotional messages which we want to release in a space, also we have to be careful not really to, so to say, bastardize, to oversimplify sometimes our messaging, but keeping within the family framework and talking about our emotions experience of having different families can also be very emotional and recognizable by the majority. So in that sense, I fully agree with that.
Great. So definitely play on the emotional side as well. Nikki, did you want to come in on emotional versus rational?
No, I don't have anything else to add.
All right, thank you. So thanks, Adrian. There's also Sabine from the Child Rights International Network, CRIN, whom we consulted during an organization we consulted during the drawing up of this guide, who is making a very important point in 3 messages. And she's now asking the question, how can we, as organizations working in different fields, work better together? And this is a question that I'll put to Nikki, because Nikki, you were talking about the importance of enabling different movements to work together. So bearing in mind the guide and how working around the concept of family, can you tell us, in answer to Sabine's question, can you tell us, Nikki, how can we work better together across different movements and organizations?
Well, first, I think we need to want to. And I think one of the things that we heard in this process was honestly at times, we haven't really done an awful lot of work with other movements around these issues. Are we open to it? Yes. Are we overwhelmed already by what's on our plate? Yes. So part of it is, I think, being able to have the support readily available so that when organizations, whether they're children's rights organizations, whether they're LGBT organizations, whether they're feminist organizations, etc., want to come together and have conversations about building a common agenda and a common set of strategies, that funders are willing to walk their talk and actually fund them. And so I think that's why we've been very deliberate in this process about also trying to build greater support from foundations and other funders, so that when groups are interested to do this, they're not faced with huge insurmountable barriers of the resources, which we know are needed and can sometimes be costly to actually bring even 10, 15 people together to have this kind of conversation, to have this space. It's a very luxury situation that most organizations at this point don't have. So I think one of our hopes is that funders will find a space in their hearts, in their pockets, to make the linkages to step forward and actually fund this work, and think with activists who are saying that they are interested, maybe they're existing grantee partners, that they're interested in reaching out to others, that funders step forward and make that funding available to actually make those conversations happen, and then to support in a long-term manner with flexible support, which has certainly been a component of the successes that we have seen take place around family equality actions, that funding is there over the longer term and is very flexible.
Thank you very much, Nikki. Sabine, I hope this answers your question. And I want to stress that on the website reclaimingfamilyvalues.eu, you'll find a contact form or an email address where you can reach us at the group. And if you have specific questions or ideas, or you want to get on the phone with one of us to start that conversation about how can we build bridges across movements and organizations, we've amassed a fair amount of possible examples and ideas in the course of our writing this guide, and we'd love to hear from you and help you out in starting this in your organization. So thank you for asking it, Sabine. The next question is from Isabel, primarily to Gordon. Isabel is asking, and I'm repeating those questions for our friends who are on YouTube and who can't see the chat box. Isabel is asking, she's interested in what you said about working with non-progressive religious actors. And she wonders if you came up against any red lines during that work where you simply couldn't agree, and how you navigated those tensions.
Yeah, that's of course a very important moral and ethical question. And I would say that I see the difference between two groups of non-progressives. The one who are really aggressive non-progressives. So the one with there is no dialogue. So those are the leaders of anti-gender movement, the people who are, fully engaged to destroy the idea of family equality, LGBT equality. So there is no space for communication. However, all non-progressive people are not like that. There is a big majority of people are still open to hear the contra-arguments. And the experience we had on our work on refugees also taught me how, when it's the issue of human rights, for example, of the refugees, even the colleagues from this group, faith-based organization, have total different position on my sexual orientation. But when they understand needs to help refugees and have the same feeling and the same need to help the refugee in trouble, even we are so far away on some other topics, there is no other argument than help the refugee, whatever, because if I will not help the refugee because the another group has some problems with LGBT rights, that will be also much more. So in this sense, I think we learn through the time, and also through this time working together, what I have also learned that not everyone are aggressive, non-progressive. So there are people who just have different opinions. And they have also learned that all of us who are like progressive on the other side, we are not against the life. We are not against the people. So it will take us maybe 3, 4, 5 more years to work together, and then we will see where we will come. But it's good that we understand this is the one topic where we fully agree and we work all together on very hardcore human rights agenda. And there are some topics where we disagree. Topics of refugees, but on the edges of that work, sometimes we also discuss LGBT, abortion rights, etc. So, but it will take time. It will not go over the night.
Thank you very much, Gordon. And this definitely echoes what others we have spoken to have said when we were researching this guide. It's that there are different approaches and different backgrounds on both sides of the debate among among opponents to equality and faith-based organizations, but also within our own fields, progressive, and some faith-based organizations are progressive as well. So the boundaries aren't always exact, and it's a work of learning for both sides of the debate, definitely. Neha is also saying it would be important to balance the work of reclaiming family values with the work of addressing rights violations within families. So would the panelists like to share any examples of such balance being achieved? So Nikki or Gordon, I'll invite either of you to come online. But before you do, or as you do, I'll mention that in the guide, there is indeed one box that speaks to that, because it did come up when writing it. And it's that family equality doesn't solve everything. And we acknowledge in the guide that not all families are ideal, and that some can be sites of alienation, oppression, and violence, especially for their most vulnerable members, and that is women, children, people with disabilities, or the elderly. And so efforts to counter violence and discrimination within and outside of the family must keep going on, even if we try to reclaim family values on top of that. Nikki or Gordon, would either of you have an example of how this has been balanced in the past? And if not, that's okay. We can move on. Okay, it doesn't seem to be the case. So yeah, Nikki, do you want to come on? You're muted, I think.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry. I very straightforwardly, no, I don't have an example ready at hand. In part because I haven't seen an awful lot of work done in this area. And I think this is a challenge to us all. I think for many of us participating, and especially as feminists in this process, there was some, I would say, reluctance. It felt counterintuitive to be talking about family values and reclaiming family values, because let's face it, family values have traditionally meant a very traditional patriarchal vision and reality for women, trans people, others in families. And so it was I almost didn't participate in the process because I just couldn't wrap my head around how to be part of a process that I could point to many examples of where the opposite was happening. And so I think you're right to be lifting this up and saying this isn't kind of family narrative being put forward without the politics. Of course, the politics have to be there, and pulling out where what the wrong definition of family is, and articulating that has to be part of this process. So I don't think one supersedes the other. And indeed, in messaging around this, that will be very important. So thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you very much, Nikki. So this answers the question of Neha and also the question of Yuri. Hi, Yuri, on solving the potential tension between reclaiming family values and acknowledging the imperfection of family. And the answer there is it doesn't solve it, but both strands of work have to happen at the same time. There's a clarification question from Vili to Gordon, and Vili is asking, how does your cooperation with religious actors around refugees and migrants help create another family equality framework? Maybe there's a small clarification needed there.
Yes, it's not immediately going into the direction that now we have the new family equality framework because we are working together on the refugees. But what I see, that through this work on some totally another topic, we are coming closer as organizations, as people, as human beings, as activists. And this is what I said. So I truly believe that in 3-4 years, maybe we can also have common statement on LGBT rights. It's a long work, but just to putting down all the prejudices that we have mutually towards each other's will bring us to the point when we will be more open and more closer on the position on LGBT and gender rights. And the other thing, also we had situation, for example, across Croatia, and we were helping to this family together. Maybe they didn't perceive it as a family, but my organization, for sure, we were treating them and respecting them as a family. So also having this experience in their work, that there could be, there are queer families, and there are institutions who recognize already the existence of different families, helping them also to realize somehow that this is really also the family. Not the classical, not the traditional one, but actually it has a lot of elements of the families, of the idea of the families, which is in their head.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Gordon. For everyone's information, we're now entering the last 10 minutes of the webinar, and we will end on time by 5 p.m. Brussels time. Lilith has another question to us. Hi, Lilith. It's good to read you here. And she's asking me, as this is a novelty in our communication and advocacy work, the work of framing, reframing, it would be interesting to know whether there are any plans and opportunities to learn from each other more systematically in our progressive movements as we try to use these new frames. Are there any plans to compile and share different national experiences of reframing and reclaiming narratives? So I'll answer to the best of my knowledge, which is certainly not exhaustive, and Gordon and Nikki can also complement this, or anyone can on the chat, of course. I'm aware of a couple more initiatives in addition to ours, which gave the guide. One is that PIRC, P-I-R-C, the Public Interest Research Center, based in the UK, and ILGA Europe have been running a project, a year-long project, on every type of reframing and reclaiming and messaging work done in the LGBTI movement. And this resource is going to come out very, very soon if it hasn't yet. I'll make a note to research that and send you the link in the email you will receive after this webinar. That, however, concerns only LGBTI aspects. That being said, another initiative is a group of people led by Joël Bedos at the International Idaho Committee, the International Day Against Homophobia and Transphobia, is compiling a new online learning module on reclaiming and reframing and messaging. I don't know whether this will be SOGI or LGBTI specific, but it may include other types of work as well. And in any case, I'll look at what links I can send you, when it'll be ready, and whether it'll be including other things. But so far, that's all I'm aware of. I'll let anyone else bring this up if you want to. Gordon, did you want to add something?
Also, just to remind us all that there was this amazing referendum in Ireland, which actually won the family equality. And we also see that this referendum is kind of, that really used the approach of reclaiming the family values. In that sense, they have also documented very well all the work that it's done. So they have some really good publication to read it.
Absolutely. Great. Thank you. We'll be looking at potential resources to include in that email, and we'll be sharing them with you as soon as we can. But thank you for your question, Lilith. Sabine is also adding that very important to make in this debate, and I agree with her, it's to push for the discussion to focus on the rights of individuals within the family, instead of focusing on false claims of rights for the family itself. What do you think would be the best way to do that? Nikki and Gordon, you can get ready to answer. I would bring one small clarification to this. The work of reclaiming family values, at least as we present it in our guide and as we recommend it, is not about rights. And this may be a departure from our usual work as progressive activists, but it's not about focusing on the rights of individuals or of families. And the rights of families is a very slippery concept that, as you rightly point out, has been used to limit the rights of women or of queer people or of people of color. But it's about moving the focus away from rights and towards a shared experience of family. The fact that we all have a family and that these family ties are the same, the importance of love and care and support is the same for everyone, regardless of their gender, of their sexual orientation, of their ethnic or migrant status. And therefore, it's about focusing on that common experience rather than the rights of someone or of an entity. But indeed, it's very important to counter the narrative of family rights, because families as entities do not have rights. Individuals have rights, and they are human rights, and they must all be respected and upheld, of course. Nikki or Gordon, do you want to add anything? And then I'm inviting people to ask one last question if you want to, and if there is none other, we're going to conclude the webinar shortly. So Nikki is sending messages, but I don't know if you want to send them to nothing to add, okay? And then, okay. It seems that this concludes the discussion. Thank you very much, Nikki and Gordon. Nikki and Gordon, can you come back on the screen to wave goodbye to everyone one last time? Thank you so much for your time in Zagreb and in New York. It was a pleasure to have you together here. And I'm now going to turn to the room as well. And I should be able to share my screen in this way and to show you this. You can go to www.reclaimingfamilyvalues.eu and you can also get free paper copies. And if you're in the chat, if you're in the webinar app, you can see to your right button to the right. Want the guide in print? Click here to order free copies. You can click that yellow button, and then, as if by magic, we will send you paper and the guide will be printed on it. So that's if you want to share the guide with your colleagues in your organizations, if you want to have it available at an upcoming Pride, we'll do our best to send it very quickly to you all. You can order that on the website. You won't be able to see the link to order paper copies on the website. It's only for webinar attendees and people we've worked on the guide with earlier. It's not a public link. So do note it down. We'll also put it in the thank you email to everyone after this webinar. And we'll also send you the link to the video recording of today. Thank you all very much for your time. It's been a pleasure to speak with you all. You have very important work to go back to, no doubt, whether on the West Coast or the East Coast of the Atlantic. And we hope that our guide, Using Family as a Frame in Social Justice Activism, a guide for activists and funders in Europe, but elsewhere as well, will be very helpful to you in that regard. For now, thank you and have a nice day. Bye.